My name is Claire Dawson, and for most of my 32 years, I was the kind of person people looked through instead of at. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy, and I sure as hell wasn't the kind of woman people called important. I worked in a cramped cubicle at a mid-tier marketing firm, clocked in on time, kept my head down, and made other people look good for a living. That was fine, at least I thought it was, until the day my life got reduced to one word. Nobody. It started with the biggest account our firm had landed in years, a high-profile campaign for a luxury real estate developer. I'd done most of the early concept work, late nights, endless revisions, juggling spreadsheets and mood boards until my eyes blurred. My boss, Richard, was the kind of man who could take credit for someone else's idea without breaking a sweat. He had that charismatic leader vibe that made people forgive him for things they shouldn't. We were in a meeting with a client, a sharp, perfectly groomed woman named Felicia who spoke in clipped, decisive sentences. I was presenting a mock-up when Richard cut me off mid-sentence. "Claire, why don't you grab us some coffee?" It was the kind of casual dismissal that didn't leave room for protest. My cheeks burned, but I nodded and left the room. When I came back, coffee tray in hand, they were laughing. Felicia glanced at me, then turned to Richard and said, "She's a what?" "An assistant." Richard chuckled. "No, she's one of our designers, but don't worry, she's a nobody. We'll have the senior team take over from here." A nobody. The word hit me like a punch to the ribs. I felt the tray tremble in my hands, the hot coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. I forced a smile and set the cups down, then sat in the corner while Richard and the others dismantled months of my work as if I wasn't even there. That night, I went home and replayed it over and over in my head. How easily he'd said it. How easily she'd accepted it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to quit. But mostly, I wanted to make them choke on the word nobody. The problem was I had no idea how. I spent the next few weeks doing my job like nothing had happened. But the more I sat in that cubicle, the more I realized I wasn't angry just because Richard had called me a nobody. I was angry because somewhere deep down I believed him, and that scared me. One Friday evening, I was walking home through Times Square, weaving through the rush hour crowd. The billboards glowed above me, towering screens with models, actors, and CEOs smiling down like gods. I stopped in front of one that stretched the length of an entire building. It hit me all at once. What if my name was up there? Not my company's name. Not a brand's name.
Mine.
A ridiculous idea, sure. But it stuck in my head like a song you can't shake. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started researching. Renting billboard space in Times Square was expensive. Like, second mortgage expensive. I didn't have the money. But I'd spent years working in marketing. I knew how exposure worked. And I knew one thing for certain. If you could make something interesting enough, the internet would do half the work for you. That's when the plan started forming. I'd create something so bold, so unapologetic, that people would have to talk about it. Not a brand. Not a product. Just me. The first person I told was my best friend, Jenna, over greasy diner pancakes. "You want a what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I want to put my name on a billboard," I said, stabbing my fork into a bite of pancake. "Just my name. No ad, no company. Maybe a tagline, but it's going to be about me."
Big.
Unignorable. She laughed. "Claire, people don't just do that. They will when they're tired of being nobodies." She studied me for a second. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." I started small. I reached out to an old college acquaintance who now ran a local print shop and asked if he could mock up some billboard designs for me. We played with colors, fonts, and layouts until we landed on something clean and powerful. A black background, my name in massive white letters, and underneath in smaller type. This is what a nobody looks like. I knew it was risky. I was calling myself a nobody, but I was taking control of the word. Owning it. The next hurdle was money. I didn't have thousands to throw at this. But I remembered something from my marketing days. Unsold ad slots often went at a discount if you were willing to take whatever location and timing they had. I called a small outdoor advertising company and pitched my idea. The guy on the phone laughed, then said, "You're not selling anything?" "Nope," I said. Just an idea. 2 weeks later, I got an email. A 1-week slot had opened up on a mid-sized digital billboard in Times Square. The price was still steep, but not impossible if I drained my savings. I stared at the email for an hour before hitting book now. The week leading up to the launch felt like holding my breath underwater. I didn't tell anyone at work. I barely told Jenna. It wasn't just about the billboard anymore. It was about taking back the power I'd given away every time I let someone talk over me, diminish me, erase me. On launch day, I took the subway to Times Square early in the morning. The air was crisp, the streets just waking up. I stood on the corner, coffee in hand, waiting. And then there it was. My name. Massive.
Bright.
Unmissable. And right underneath, this is what a nobody looks like. For a second, my heart slammed so hard, I thought I might faint. People stopped to look. Some laughed. Some took pictures. And just like that, it was real. I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, I posted a picture of it on Instagram with the caption, "They called me a nobody." So, I put my name where everyone could see it. By morning, it had thousands of likes. By the end of the week, it was in 3 online articles about guerrilla personal branding. And by the end of the month, Richard had seen it. I know because he called me into his office. Richard's assistant poked her head over my cubicle wall on Monday morning. "Richard wants to see you. Now." Her tone wasn't the fake sweet office kind. It was flat, like she didn't want to be the messenger. I saved the file I'd been working on, took a sip of my coffee, and told myself I was ready. I wasn't. Richard's office looked the same as it always did. Tasteful, expensive furniture, a view of the skyline that screamed important man, and just enough clutter on his desk to look busy without being messy. He was leaning back in his chair when I walked in, hands steepled like he'd been practicing his serious conversation pose. "Claire," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Care to explain this?"
He turned his monitor toward me.
My billboard photo filled the screen. My name in giant white letters, the words "This is what a nobody looks like" blazing underneath. I kept my face neutral. "It's a personal project." His eyebrows shot up. "A personal project? In Times Square?" "Yes," I said. "I booked the space myself. Paid for it with my own money. It has nothing to do with the company." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, it has everything to do with the company when one of my employees is making a public spectacle of herself." "Spectacle?" I tilted my head. "You mean visibility. Isn't that what we're in the business of selling?" His jaw tightened. "Don't get cute, Claire. Clients have seen this. They're asking questions. What do I tell them? That one of my designers is running some personal revenge campaign." I met his gaze, steady. "You tell them the truth. You called me a nobody. And now people know my name." For a second, I thought he might actually lose his composure. But Richard was too polished for that. Instead, he leaned back, smirking like he'd just won something. "Careful, Claire. You might find out how quickly you can go from nobody to unemployed." I stood. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll find out how quickly I can go from nobody to someone who doesn't need you." I walked out before he could answer. The tension didn't go away after that meeting, it got worse. Whispers followed me down the hall. Some coworkers gave me nods of approval in the break room. Others avoided me like I was radioactive. But outside of work, the reaction was completely different. The photo I'd posted at the billboard had gone from a few thousand likes to nearly 50,000 in less than a week. My inbox was full of messages, strangers telling me they'd been called nobodies too, brands asking if I'd be interested in collaborations, podcasters wanting me to tell my story. One email stood out. "We'd love to feature you in our Women Who Did It Anyway profile series." The sender was a senior editor at Metro, a lifestyle and culture magazine I'd read religiously in my 20s. I met the Metro journalist, a sharp, kind-eyed woman named Sandra, in a sunlit cafe in Chelsea. She ordered an oat milk latte, opened her notebook, and said, "So, who exactly called you a nobody?" Part of me wanted to tell her everything, name names, lay out every petty dismissal and stolen credit. But I also knew Richard would spin it as some bitter ex-employee trying to ruin him, and I wasn't ready for that headline. A boss, I said simply. Someone I trusted to see my work, but who only saw me as background. Sandra nodded, scribbling. And the billboard? I wanted to take the word back, I said. Make it mine before it could be used against me again. If people were going to call me a nobody, I was going to define what that meant. By the end of the interview, she'd convinced me to let them do a photo shoot, me standing in Times Square under the billboard, wearing whatever made me feel most like myself. The article went live a week later. The headline read, "From Nobody to Billboard: How One Woman Turned an Insult into a Statement." Within hours, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. People from high school, distant cousins, old clients, they all wanted to talk. Even my landlord mentioned it when I passed him in the hallway. That's when the second wave of messages started, this time from other companies. Design firms, marketing agencies, even a few startups offering creative director roles. It felt like oxygen after years of breathing through a straw. Of course, Richard didn't see it that way. On Friday afternoon, he called me into another meeting. This time, there were 2 HR reps in the room. "We've decided," he said in his smooth, corporate voice, "that your actions have created a conflict of interest. Effective immediately, your position here is terminated." I felt a flash of panic, then something else. Relief.
I didn't beg. I didn't argue.
I signed the paperwork, shook hands with the HR reps, and walked out with my head high. The air outside felt different, lighter, sharper, like I could finally breathe in full. The next morning, Jenna showed up at my apartment with bagels and a bottle of champagne. "You're free," she said, popping the cork like we'd just won a championship. I laughed. "I'm unemployed." "You're unleashed," she corrected. Big difference. 2 weeks later, I had my first official job offer, creative director for a mid-sized agency that specialized in bold, unconventional campaigns. The pay was better, the title was a leap forward, and the CEO's first words to me were, "We want you because you make people look up." On my first day, they handed me my own office. I unpacked my things slowly, savoring the fact that every piece of art, every pen, every notebook was mine. No one could call me invisible here. But I wasn't done yet. The billboard had started something bigger than me. I kept getting messages from women and men who wanted to reclaim their own nobody moments. One night over wine, Jenna said, "You should do a whole series. Rent billboards in different cities, feature different names and stories. Make it a movement." The idea hit me so hard I couldn't sit still. By the next morning, I was sketching designs. Bold letters, first names only, and a line underneath. "This is what a nobody looks like." Each billboard would link to a site where people could read the story behind the name. It took months of planning, pitching, and partnering with smaller ad companies willing to give me discounted space. But by spring, we had billboards in 5 cities. The stories poured in: teachers, nurses, artists, small business owners, people who'd been dismissed, underestimated, told they didn't matter. And now their names were 10 feet tall. One afternoon, while walking past the original Times Square billboard spot, I noticed someone staring up at it. This time, it was a young woman, maybe 22, with a worn backpack and paint-stained jeans. She had her phone out, taking a picture, her eyes wide. I stopped beside her. "What do you think?" She smiled. "Makes me feel like maybe I'm not as small as I thought." I smiled back. "You're not." That night, I posted a picture of her looking up at the billboard with the caption, "They told me I was a nobody. Turns out, I'm one of many, and we're everywhere." The first time I saw my project mentioned on national TV, I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants, eating leftover pad thai. The anchor's voice was bright, polished, the kind that made even tragic news sound like a warm invitation. Up next, a viral billboard campaign that's giving so-called nobodies a chance to be seen. We'll meet the woman behind it. I nearly dropped my fork. The segment was only 3 minutes long, but it showed footage of billboards in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. They interviewed a nurse from Philly who'd been featured, a man in Detroit who'd reclaimed his name after being told he'd never make it, and then me, clips from my Metro interview, and the original Times Square shot. "This is what a nobody looks like," I heard my own voice say over the closing shot of my name lit up against the night. By the next morning, my inbox was a war zone. Hundreds of messages from strangers. Requests for interviews. Offers from talk shows. PR agents sniffing around to see if I needed representation. It was intoxicating and terrifying. The movement wasn't just mine anymore. It was bigger, louder, and moving faster than I could keep up. Jenna came over that night with wine and a notebook, ready to play strategist. "You need a team," she said, flipping a page. "People to handle media requests, partnerships, scheduling. You can't do all this by yourself." "I know," I said, rubbing my temples. "But I don't want it to turn into some polished PR stunt." "That's not the point." She raised an eyebrow. "Claire, you've got to scale this thing, or it's going to eat you alive. And if you don't, someone else will, and they'll do it wrong." 2 weeks later, I had a small but mighty crew, a project manager, a social media lead, and 2 part-time researchers to find and vet stories. We worked out of a rented co-working space with exposed brick and terrible coffee, surrounded by other scrappy startups. It was messy and exhausting, but it worked until the critics showed up. The first article was on a gossip-heavy culture blog, Billboard Nobody or Fame-Hungry Somebody. How Claire Dawson turned an insult into a brand. They accused me of chasing celebrity, of exploiting people's stories for clicks, of selling empowerment like a product. The comments section was worse. Strangers calling me fake. Others saying I'd made it all up. One particularly creative commenter said I was the influencer version of a motivational mug. I read every word. I wish I hadn't. It messed with my head. For the first time since I started, I hesitated before posting a new Billboard photo. I second-guessed captions, worried about whether they sounded authentic or self-promotional. My team noticed, but I brushed it off. It wasn't until one of our featured nobodies, a retired teacher from Denver, emailed me that I snapped out of it. "Claire," she wrote, "the day my Billboard went up, 3 of my former students called me. I haven't heard from them in years. It made me feel like my life mattered again. Please don't stop because of people who don't get it." I sat at my desk, tears blurring the screen. That weekend, I booked a train ticket to Philadelphia to meet the nurse from the TV segment in person. Her name was Elena, and she'd been told by a supervisor early in her career that she was replaceable. We met outside the hospital where she worked. She wore scrubs, hair pulled into a neat bun, and when she saw me, she grinned like we were old friends. "Claire Dawson," she said, shaking her head. "You put me on a billboard." My mom cried for 2 days straight. I laughed, but my chest felt tight. We walked to the corner where her billboard still stood, her name in huge letters, that same line underneath. "This is what a nobody looks like." "I'm not replaceable," she said quietly, looking up at it. "No," I said. "You never were." After that, I stopped reading the hate pieces. Instead, I started recording short videos with each person we featured, letting them tell their own story in their own words. No PR polish, no scripts, just them. It worked. Our following doubled in a month. Brands started approaching us not to sell things, but to sponsor more billboards in more cities. And then one morning, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "I think we should talk." Richard. I stared at it for a full minute before setting the phone down. I hadn't heard from him since the day he fired me. I assumed I never would. But curiosity has a way of worming into your resolve. I replied, "About what?" His response came quick. "We're losing clients. People are asking about you. I think we could collaborate." I laughed so hard I had to put my coffee down. Collaborate. The man who'd called me a nobody, who'd pushed me out of my job, now wanted in. Jenna's reaction was immediate. "Tell him to shove it." "I want to," I said. "But part of me wants to hear him squirm." "Then make him come to you," she said, grinning. So I did. We met in a small cafe near my co-working space. He walked in wearing the same tailored suit and smug expression, but there was something else now, a tightness around the eyes, a little less shine in the smile. "Claire," he said, like we were old friends. "You look successful." I sipped my coffee. "I am." He launched into his pitch, how his firm could help me expand, how they had resources and connections I couldn't possibly have access to on my own. When he finally paused for air, I said, "You called me a nobody. Remember that?" His jaw shifted. I was joking. "No, you weren't," I said. "But here's the thing. You were wrong. And I don't need you to admit it. I just need you to watch me keep proving it." I stood, dropped a 10 on the table for my coffee, and walked out. 3 months later, the Nobody movement had billboards in 20 cities and a feature on the cover of Impact magazine. The headline read, "From Nobody to Nation, How Claire Dawson Made the World Look Up." When I saw it, I thought about that meeting in Richard's office, about the word that had felt like a sentence. And I realized something. Revenge wasn't putting my name on the billboard. Revenge was making sure there would never be enough billboards to hold all the names that deserved to be seen. When the first overseas billboard went up, I was asleep. It was Jenna who woke me with a 3 a.m. call.
"Claire,
"Wake up. You're in Tokyo." "What?" My voice was thick with sleep. "Check your email," she said, and hung up. I rolled over, opened my laptop, and there it was, a photo from a journalist friend. My name, massive, glowing white letters, loomed over Shibuya Crossing, with the Japanese translation of "This is what a nobody looks like" just beneath. The caption read, "First one in Asia. More coming." It took me a moment to process. The campaign had started as one billboard in Times Square. Now, without me booking a single slot, the phrase was appearing in other languages, other alphabets, other continents. It wasn't just Tokyo. Within a month, we had billboards, official ones we'd funded and unofficial ones that supporters had crowdfunded, in Berlin, Johannesburg, Sydney, and Sao Paulo. People were tagging me in photos from airports, subway stations, even side of a fishing boat in Greece, where someone had painted the words in red block letters. It was thrilling and terrifying, because with reach came a new problem: control. I first noticed it when a fast fashion brand reached out, offering a strategic partnership. They wanted to plaster "This is what a nobody looks like" on t-shirts, tote bags, coffee mugs, sold in their stores worldwide. "We make sure your cut is generous," the email read. You could fund dozens of new billboards. But the company had a history of sweatshop labor. My gut reaction was no. My team's reaction was split. Half saw it as a sellout move, the other half argued we could take their money and do good with it. I thought about Elena, the nurse from Philadelphia, about the retired teacher from Denver, about the quiet dignity in their faces when they saw their names 10 feet tall. Did I really want that message sitting on a $5 tote bag in a chain store window? I declined, politely but firmly. Not everyone liked my decision. An opinion piece in a major business magazine accused me of limiting the movement's potential and rejecting viable monetization pathways. My inbox filled with unsolicited advice from strangers telling me how I could fix my model. It was dizzying. The more the movement grew, the more people seemed to think they owned it. One night, I sat alone in the co-working space long after everyone else had gone. The city lights outside blurred against the glass, and the room was silent except for the hum of the vending machine. I pulled up the original photo of my Times Square billboard, the one that started it all. My name in white, that one defiant line underneath. Back then, it was just me. My money, my risk, my statement. Now, it felt like I was holding a tiger by the tail. The next day, I called a team meeting. "I know things are moving fast," I began, "and I know it's tempting to say yes to every opportunity. But if we turn this into a slogan for sale, it's over. This is about people, not products." I saw a few nods. I also saw the tight-lipped looks from those who thought I was being naive. "I'm not here to be everyone's boss," I said. "I'm here to protect what this means. If that means slower growth, fine. If that means fewer billboards, fine. But if we sell out, we lose the soul of it, and once it's gone for good." 2 weeks later, a different kind of offer came in. The United Nations was hosting a global women's empowerment summit in Geneva. They wanted me to give a keynote address, and they were offering to fund an international series of nobody billboards tied to the event. It was the kind of opportunity one couldn't ignore. Geneva in the spring felt like a dream. Clean air, lake water that looked like glass, mountains in the distance. The conference center buzzed with delegates, activists, and journalists from every corner of the globe. I walked onto the stage in front of more than 2,000 people. Behind me, a massive screen lit up with a montage of nobody billboards from around the world. I started with one name, mine. I began. Not to make myself famous, but to make sure nobody could erase me again. What I didn't expect was that it would become a mirror for thousands of others who'd been told the same thing. I talked about Richard, without naming him. I talked about the moment I realized revenge wasn't enough, that visibility was the real victory. I told them about Elena, about the teacher in Denver, about the young woman I'd met in Times Square staring up at the billboard like it was a doorway. When I finished, the applause rolled over me like a wave. The next morning, my phone lit up with a text from Jenna.
Claire.
Check the news.
Now.
I opened the link she'd sent and froze. The front page of an international news site showed a photo from the summit. I was standing at the podium, the words "This is what a nobody looks like" towering behind me in a dozen languages. The headline read, "From Times Square to the world, the nobody who made everybody look up." That headline stayed with me, because the truth was, I wasn't a nobody anymore. And neither were the thousands of people who'd stood in front of those billboards and seen their names lit up. The movement had gone global. But the real challenge was still ahead, keeping it human in a world that wanted to turn it into a commodity. And I was ready to fight for that, because I knew what it felt like to be invisible. And I never wanted anyone else to feel it again. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Global Expansion Proposal, Confidential. I almost deleted it without reading. Lately, my inbox had been full of partnership opportunities that were really just ways to slap "This is what a nobody looks like" on coffee mugs or Instagram ads. But this one was from a name I recognized: Visionary Media Group. They were a giant, one of those conglomerates that owned everything from television networks to outdoor advertising companies. Their email was short, formal, and to the point. "We're prepared to offer full funding to expand your project to every major city in the world. All costs covered. 10-year rights. Let's talk." I read it 3 times. Every major city in the world. It was everything I dreamed of in those early days. Visibility for everyone, everywhere. No more waiting for discounted ad slots. No more scraping together crowdfunding campaigns. But the second half of the proposal made my stomach twist. 10-year rights. That meant they'd own it. My name, the slogan, the whole identity. They could change the design, edit the stories, even decide who got featured. It was my dream.
And it was my nightmare.
I called Jenna. "They're offering what?" she said, nearly choking on her coffee. "Global rollout. All funded. But they'd own it. Completely." Silence on the other end. Then, "Claire, that's insane. Do you know what you could do with that kind of reach?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And do you know what they could do with it if I'm not in control?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, my bare feet catching on the frayed edge of the rug. I kept thinking about that first billboard, my name, my money, my risk. About Elena in Philadelphia, the teacher in Denver, the young woman in Times Square. If Visionary Media Group took over, would they feature people like them? Or would they turn the billboards into curated influencer moments, designed to sell some luxury lifestyle? The problem was, saying no didn't just affect me anymore. It affected every person who'd been waiting for a billboard in their city, every story on our growing list. 2 days later, I flew to Los Angeles to meet with Visionary CEO, a slick man named Adrian Cole. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, perfect tan, smile like a blade. "Claire," he said, shaking my hand. "You've built something extraordinary. We want to take it global. Think about it, your message in every major city, in every language, reaching billions." "It's not my message," I said. "It's everyone's." He smiled. "Exactly. And we can make sure it's everyone's faster than you can." I asked about creative control. His answer was smooth and rehearsed. "We'd collaborate, of course. But at a certain scale, decisions have to be streamlined." Streamlined. Another word for out of your hands. Back in my hotel room, I called my project manager, Priya. "If we turn them down," I said, We keep growing slowly. We keep it pure. But if we say yes, we risk losing the soul, she finished. Or, I said, we risk missing the chance to reach people who need it. The decision deadline was in 5 days. I spent the first 2 avoiding it, burying myself in smaller projects, answering emails, meeting with our team about the next set of billboards in Toronto and Mexico City. But the question kept circling back. Was protecting the movement worth limiting it? On the 3rd day, I got an email from a woman named Mariana in Brazil. She'd been featured on a locally crowd-funded nobody billboard in Sao Paulo. Her story was simple. She'd been a maid in a wealthy household for 20 years, treated like furniture, never called by her name. Seeing it in bold letters above a busy street had made her cry. "I am not invisible anymore," she wrote. "Thank you for showing me that my name matters." I read it 3 times. Then I called Jenna. "I think I have my answer," I said. The next morning, I met Adrian Cole again, this time in New York, in a sleek glass conference room overlooking the city. His team was there, all crisp suits and expensive watches. "We're ready for your decision," he said. I took a deep breath. "I'm grateful for the offer. But the answer is no." His smile didn't waver. "Can I ask why?" "Because this isn't a product," I said. "It's a promise. And you can't sell a promise without breaking it." There was a flicker in his eyes, annoyance, maybe even respect. "You know you're walking away from billions in exposure." "I know," I said. "But I'd rather have 1 billboard I believe in than 1,000 I don't recognize." Walking out of that building felt like walking out of Richard's office all over again, except this time, I wasn't scared. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have billions. But I had control. And that was worth more than any contract. We went back to our slower, scrappier way of working, raising funds, partnering with ethical companies, choosing each story ourselves. It wasn't glamorous. Sometimes it was exhausting. But it was real. And a funny thing happened. The very fact that we'd turned down Visionary Media Group became a story in itself. Articles called it the movement that said no to the machine. People donated more, volunteered more, believed more. One journalist asked me if I regretted it. I told her the truth. The day I sell this to someone who doesn't understand it, it stops being mine. And it stops being ours. That winter, we unveiled a new billboard in Times Square, same location as the first one, but this time it didn't just have my name. It had hundreds of names. Tiny, in different fonts and colors, layered over each other until they filled the entire space. Above them, in massive white letters, "This is what a nobody looks like." The crowd that gathered that night was bigger than any we'd had before. People pointed out their names, took photos, hugged strangers. I stood there in the cold, Jenna at my side, and thought about how far we'd come from that first coffee-fetching meeting. Richard had called me a nobody. And maybe he was right back then. But now nobody was everybody. And that was the point. It was almost a year to the day since that first billboard went up in Times Square when I decided to go back. No cameras. No team. No press release. Just me, a coffee from the bodega on the corner, and the quiet need to see where it all started. The winter air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the subway into the chaos of lights and noise. Even after all the billboards we'd launched around the world, nothing compared to this. The blinding spectacle, the constant hum of traffic and chatter, the feeling that every surface was screaming to be noticed. And there it was, the new Times Square billboard. Not just my name this time, but hundreds of them, people from every continent, every walk of life, layered together like a tapestry. Some in bold type, others scrawled in messy script, all of them defiant. Above it all, the same line, "This is what a nobody looks like." I stood there for a long time, watching strangers stop to read it. A teenage boy in a puffy red jacket pointed at the top left corner and grinned, calling his friend over. An older woman pulled out her phone and took a picture, her hands trembling. A man in a business suit paused mid-stride, stared up for a few seconds, and then kept walking, slower now, like the words had caught on something inside him. I sipped my coffee and let the memories wash over me. That first meeting in Richard's office, his smug face as he told me I was a nobody. The way my hands had shaken as I signed the paperwork to rent that first billboard space. The hollow fear when I hit post on the photo, wondering if it would vanish into the internet void. And then the messages. The interviews. The strangers who said they felt seen for the first time in their lives. The offers I'd turned down to keep it real. I thought about Adrian Cole and Visionary Media Group. About the meeting in that glass-walled conference room when I told him no. About the relief I'd felt walking away, even knowing I'd made the harder choice. Someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to see a woman in her 50s, bundled in a gray wool coat, her dark hair streaked with silver. She smiled shyly. "Are you Claire?" I nodded, and her eyes welled up. "I'm on there." My daughter submitted my name without telling me. She said she wanted me to know I mattered. For a second, I couldn't speak. I just smiled back, my throat tight. She squeezed my hand before disappearing into the crowd, leaving me rooted to the spot. That night, I walked the long way home, past the side streets where the neon didn't quite reach, the quiet patches of the city that felt more like secrets. I thought about how strange it was, how something that had started as a kind of personal revenge had grown into this living, breathing thing that didn't belong to me anymore. And how much better that felt. The truth was, Richard had given me a gift when he called me a nobody. He'd stripped me down to the one thing I could rebuild from scratch, my name. And I had built it into something no one could erase. Back in my apartment, I found an email from Jenna waiting for me. "Got something for you. Check the attachment." It was a photo. At first, I thought it was just another of our billboards, but the location stopped me cold.
It was my old office building.
The one where Richard had worked. And plastered across the side, 3 stories high, was a billboard with my name. Underneath it, in bold letters, "This is what a nobody looks like." I stared at it for a long time, laughing until my eyes burned. The next morning, I took the subway to see it in person. It was even better up close. The billboard completely blocked the row of corner offices where Richard used to hold court. I imagined him walking in, coffee in hand, looking out the window, and seeing me looking back. I didn't need to talk to him, didn't need to hear an apology or see a change of heart. The billboard was enough. That night, I wrote a post for our page. A year ago, I was told I was a nobody. Today, I saw my name on a building I once walked into every day, carrying someone else's coffee. The difference between then and now isn't fame, it's that I decided who I am. Nobody can take that away from you. Nobody. The comments poured in. People tagging friends, telling their own nobody stories, posting photos of the billboards in their cities. And for the first time in months, I let myself believe this wasn't just a movement. It was a legacy. It was late spring when I realized the movement no longer needed me at the center. We were in a warehouse in Queens, surrounded by stacks of rolled vinyl and crates of spray paint. My team, bigger now, more diverse, was preparing for the next wave of billboards. I was supposed to be directing the shoot for a new set of portraits, but I kept catching myself just watching them. Priya was hunched over her laptop, coordinating installation crews in 3 countries. Malik, our social media lead, was reviewing a video submission from a high school class in Kenya. A group of volunteers from the Bronx were carefully stenciling names in bold letters, chatting like old friends. It hit me all at once. This wasn't my story anymore. It was theirs. That night, I sat on my fire escape with a notebook and a pen. I thought about how the whole thing had started, not as some grand vision, but as a middle finger to a man who thought he could define my worth. And I thought about how different I felt now. Back then, revenge was the fuel. Now it was connection, visibility. Knowing that somewhere, someone would see their own name in lights and feel that spark of recognition. I decided it was time to hand over more of the work and the credit to the people who'd kept this thing alive. 2 weeks later, we held the first Nobody Summit. It was part workshop, part reunion, part celebration. We rented out a community arts center and filled it with portraits of people who'd been featured over the past year. There were name tags, but most people didn't need them. They'd seen each other online in videos and photos and greeted each other like old friends. I opened the day with a short speech. When I started this, I told them it was about proving one person wrong. But it's grown into something that proves hundreds of thousands of people right, about their worth, their value, their visibility. And I'm not here to be the face of it anymore. I'm here to make sure you are. We spent the afternoon brainstorming future campaigns. The best ideas came from people who'd been on the billboards themselves: an Indigenous woman from Australia who wanted to bring the project to rural communities, a deaf activist from Poland who proposed a video series in sign language, a refugee from Syria who dreamed of displaying names in the cities they'd fled. I told them the truth. They didn't need my permission to make it happen. After the summit, I started stepping back. I still worked with the team, but more as a mentor than a leader. I let Priya handle the big sponsorship calls, let Malik decide which stories to feature, let volunteers choose where the next billboards went. At first, it felt strange, like letting go of the handlebars after riding a bike for years. But slowly, it started to feel like freedom. One evening, I got an email from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. It was Richard. Saw your new billboard in London. Impressive. Looks like you proved your point. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or triumph when I read his name. Just a quiet kind of amusement. I typed back, it was never just my point, but I'm glad you noticed. And then I closed the email and didn't think about him again. That summer, I traveled to places I'd only ever seen in photos. I stood in the shadow of a billboard in Nairobi with a group of young poets whose names had just gone up. I watched a bus drive through Paris with "This is what a nobody looks like" wrapped around it in gold script. I saw the words carved into ice at a winter festival in Iceland, glowing under northern lights. In each place, people would ask me if I felt proud. And I did. But not because my name had been on the first billboard.
Because it no longer mattered if it was.
On my last night abroad, I was in a small cafe in Lisbon when a teenage girl came up to me. She had a sketchbook under her arm and paint on her fingertips. "You're the billboard woman," she said shyly. I laughed. "I guess I am." "My name was on one in Porto," she told me. It made me want to paint again. I stopped after my teacher said I wasn't talented. But when I saw it, I thought maybe she was wrong. I felt that old tightness in my chest. The same one I'd felt standing in Times Square, seeing my own name up there for the first time.
She was wrong, I said.
When I got home, I stood in front of my wall of mementos, photos, press clippings, thank you notes. I realized it was time for something I hadn't done in years. I took down the original print of the first billboard. Not to hide it, but to make room for all the others. This wasn't the story of one name anymore. It was the story of many. On the anniversary of the first Times Square launch, the team surprised me. They'd rented a small theater and filled it with everyone who'd been part of the movement from the start. On the big screen, they played a video montage, billboards in every country, names in every language, faces smiling up at their own visibility. At the end, the words appeared. "This is what a nobody looks like. This is what everybody looks like." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry. Not for the girl who'd been called a nobody. For the world that finally understood there's no such thing. That was the moment I knew my work here was done. Not because the movement was over, but because it would go on without me, stronger, wider, more unstoppable than it had ever been when it was just mine. And that, more than any billboard, was the real victory.